He kissed her best friend in front of everyone, cameras flashing, classmates cheering, while the girl who had loved him for 10 years stood 20 feet away, holding a glass of punch she never got to drink. Lillian Ashcroft didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood completely still, watching the boy she had built her entire future around wrap his hand around Vivian's waist like it was the most natural thing in the world, like Lillian had never existed at all. But here's what nobody in that room knew. 12 hours earlier, he had been whispering promises into her hair. And 6 hours before that moment at the prom, she had already heard everything, every cruel word, every laugh, every sentence that turned 10 years of love into a joke. If you were in her place, if the person you trusted most looked right through you like you were invisible, what would you do? If this story already has your heart racing, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel and follow Lillian's journey all the way to the end, because trust me, where she ends up will leave you speechless. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning. It all fell apart. Started the way most devastating mornings do, quietly, without warning, wrapped in the kind of golden light that makes you believe the world is still good. Lillian woke up in Dante Moretti's bedroom feeling like she had finally landed somewhere safe. She was 22 years old, and she had loved Dante since she was 12. That's a decade of birthday wishes, of lying awake at night replaying conversations, of convincing herself that the way he looked at her sometimes, just sometimes, meant something real. 10 years of being the girl next door who watched him grow from a reckless teenager into a man who carried an empire on his shoulders and somehow still made it look effortless. The Moretti family was not the kind of family you talked about openly in polite company. Everyone in their neighborhood knew who they were. The black SUVs that idled outside the main house at odd hours, the men in expensive suits who came and went without making eye contact, the way certain conversations stopped when you walked into a room. Lillian had grown up understanding these things without ever being told directly. The Morettis had money, power, and a history that stretched back 3 generations of decisions made in rooms with no windows. Dante was the heir to all of it. And last night, graduation eve, he had finally told her what she had been waiting a decade to hear. She could still feel where his hands had been, could still hear his voice, low and unhurried, saying things like, "You're the only one I trust, and after I take over, I want you beside me and you'll be mine in every way that matters, Lillian. I mean that." She had believed every word. She had believed every single word because she was not stupid. She knew the difference between a man performing and a man being honest. Or she thought she did. She had spent 10 years studying Dante Moretti the way other girls studied textbooks, memorizing the tiny tells, the moments when his guard dropped. Last night felt different. Last night felt like the real thing finally surfacing after years of waiting just beneath the surface. She lay still in his bed, listening to the sound of his voice carrying up from somewhere downstairs, and she smiled at the ceiling like an absolute fool. Then the words started taking shape. Dante was speaking Italian. This was not unusual. The Moretti household switched between English and Italian the way other families switched between casual and formal, fluidly, without thinking, depending on who was in the room. What was unusual was the name Lillian caught drifting up through the floorboards. Her own name. She sat up slowly. The voice answering Dante belonged to Marco Hale, her adoptive brother, her supposed protector, the one person in her life who had always known exactly how she felt about Dante. Marco had grown up intertwined with both of them, close enough to the Moretti family to be trusted, close enough to Lillian to know her secrets. She heard Dante laugh. It was not a warm laugh. It was the kind of laugh that belongs in locker rooms and back seats, comfortable, careless, the laugh of a man who believes no one is listening. And then, in Italian, he said it. She was practice. That's all. A warm-up before the real thing. Lillian's fingers went cold against the bedsheet. Vivian is different. Vivian actually challenges me. Lillian has been chasing me since we were kids. She'll wait forever if I let her. Girls like her always do. Marco said something low that she couldn't fully catch. Dante laughed again. She doesn't even speak Italian. What's she gonna do? Figure it out. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a person when they hear something that rearranges the entire architecture of who they believed they were. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It arrives the way a structural crack arrives in an old building, suddenly visible, though it has been spreading for years. Lillian sat in that silence for exactly 43 seconds. She counted, later. She didn't know why she counted. Maybe because her brain needed something to hold on to while the rest of her quietly dismantled every memory she had assigned meaning to. Every look, every touch, every whispered promise from the night before. Practice. She was practice. She got dressed with the focused precision of someone defusing a bomb. Every motion deliberate. Her dress from last night, her shoes, her small evening bag. She moved without sound, her muscle memory carrying her through the familiar geography of Dante's room. A room she had been in dozens of times over the years, always as his neighbor's daughter, always as just Lillian, never quite as the woman she had convinced herself she was becoming to him. She did not cry. She didn't allow herself that yet. She found the back staircase and let herself out of the house through the kitchen door, nodding once to the housekeeper who looked up from the counter, who said nothing, who had probably seen plenty of things in that house she had no intention of commenting on. Outside, the June air hit Lillian like cold water. She walked home with her shoes in her hand because the heels would have made noise on the pavement, and she was not ready to be heard yet. She needed the silence. She needed the 32 steps between the Moretti driveway and her own front door to figure out what she was going to do with the rest of her life now that it had been completely restructured without her permission. What she did not do, and this is important, was fall apart. That surprised her, honestly. She had always assumed that the moment she discovered something like this, she would collapse. Cry until she couldn't breathe. Call her best friend in a panic. Except her best friend was Vivian. And Vivian, apparently, was the real thing. Lillian sat down at her kitchen table and drank a full glass of water standing up, then sat down and drank another one. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her face was calm in a way that frightened her a little when she caught her own reflection in the dark window above the sink. She looked like a woman who had just made a decision she hadn't known she was capable of making. She pulled out her laptop. MIT had offered her early admission 6 months ago, a full scholarship, engineering, which she was genuinely brilliant at in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself at parties, but shows up consistently on every exam, every project, every standardized test she had ever sat down in front of. Her counselor had called it a generational talent. Her parents had cried. Lillian had deferred enrollment to attend Hartfield University with Dante. She pulled up the MIT admissions portal. The offer was still there. She had never formally declined it. She had simply let the deadline creep closer and closer, always telling herself she would figure it out, always knowing deep down that what she was really waiting for was permission, from Dante, from the version of her future she had drawn herself into like a figure in someone else's painting. She undeferred her enrollment before 8 a.m., and then she made coffee, and she sat very still, and she let herself feel it. Not the anger, that would come later, slow and clean and surprisingly useful. Not the grief. That too would take its time arriving, working through her in waves over the following weeks. What she let herself feel first was something she hadn't expected. Relief. Faint, and a little shameful, and absolutely real. Like a knot in her chest that had been tightening for 10 years had just, quietly, released one thread. She was going to MIT. She was going alone. And she was not going to say a single word to Dante Moretti about any of it. That decision, the silence, was harder than it sounds. Lillian had not been raised to retreat quietly. Her adoptive parents were straightforward, practical people who believed in saying what you meant and meaning what you said, and for most of her life she had operated the same way. She didn't do games. She didn't do passive aggression. She didn't understand people who swallowed their pain and smiled through it. And yet, there was something in her that morning that understood with sudden clarity that confronting Dante would give him exactly what he expected. He expected her to cry, to demand answers, to make him feel like he owed her something, which would allow him to sigh generously and say something like, "Lillian, I never promised you anything specific," and walk away with his conscience clean and his pride intact. He expected her to chase him. He was so confident she would always chase him that he had said so to her own brother over breakfast. She was not going to chase him. She was not going to do anything at all. The most devastating thing she could do to a man who believed she was guaranteed was simply to stop being available. No explanation, no goodbye speech, no tearful confession about what she'd overheard. Just Lillian Ashcroft, here one day and gone the next. leaving a space where his certainty used to be. It was the coldest decision she had ever made, and she made it with a steadiness that she would later recognize as the first real glimpse of who she was becoming. The graduation prom was that evening. Lillian went. Of course she went. She had a dress she'd spent 3 weeks finding, friends who were counting on her, a life she had been living before Dante became the center of it. And she was not going to let one morning of ruins cancel all of that. She went with her friend Clara, who was loud and brilliant and didn't know any of what had happened, and Lillian was grateful for both of those things. She looked beautiful. She had always been beautiful in the understated way that people often overlook until they stop and actually look. Slender, with dark eyes that held things carefully, and the kind of face that grew more interesting the longer you studied it. She wore deep burgundy and kept her hair down, and she laughed at Clara's jokes, and she danced to 2 songs, and she was doing genuinely fine for approximately 40 minutes. Then the doors at the far end of the gymnasium opened. Dante walked in with Vivian Cross on his arm. Vivian, who was Lillian's best friend since the 7th grade. Vivian, who was taller and louder and more immediately striking, who wore red like she had been born in it, who had the kind of confidence that filled rooms before she entered them. Vivian, who had never once mentioned anything, not one word, not one hint, not a single sideways glance that Lillian might have caught and questioned. They walked in together like they had been doing it for years. The room reacted the way rooms react to beautiful people arriving, a visible shift in energy, a ripple of recognition. Someone somewhere started applauding lightly, the kind of automatic social response to an attractive couple that people don't even realize they're performing. And then Dante kissed her. Not a small kiss, not a polite, public, appropriate greeting. A real kiss, deliberate and unhurried, the kind of kiss that communicates, "This is mine, and I want everyone to see it." The crowd cheered. Lillian watched from across the room. She had a cup of punch in her hand. She set it down very carefully on the table behind her without looking away from them. She watched Vivian laugh against Dante's mouth, watched his hand rest at the small of her back exactly the way he had once rested his hand on Lillian's shoulder, with the easy confidence of ownership, and she felt something move through her that she could not immediately name. Later, she would identify it as the final piece of grief clicking into place. Because here was the thing that cut deeper than the betrayal itself, deeper than the Italian conversation she wasn't supposed to understand, deeper even than the word practice. Dante had told Lillian he didn't like kissing in public. He had told her this multiple times, over multiple years, whenever she had angled for something more visible, more acknowledged, some public proof that she existed to him as more than just the girl next door. He always pulled back, always said he was private about affection, that it wasn't his style, that real intimacy didn't need an audience. She had accepted that. She had actually defended him to people who raised their eyebrows at how little he showed. He kissed Vivian in front of 200 people like he had invented the concept. Clara grabbed Lillian's arm. "Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Lillian said, and her voice came out steady and even and completely unlike a lie. "You sure? Because that's kind of..." "Clara." Lillian finally looked away from them. She looked at her friend directly, and whatever Clara saw in her face made her go quiet. "I'm fine, I promise. Tell me about your summer plans." Clara hesitated for exactly 1 second, then took her cue like the good friend she was. "Okay, so my aunt has this ridiculous beach house in Maine that she keeps inviting us to." Lillian smiled and listened and did not look at Dante Moretti again for the rest of the night. That was its own kind of victory, small, private, invisible to everyone else. But it was hers. The weeks that followed were a particular kind of quiet war. Dante, it turned out, had absolutely no idea anything was wrong. This was the part that managed to shock Lillian even after everything else had already shocked her. The sheer scale of his confidence. He still called. He still dropped by the house with the loose, proprietary ease of someone who has never had a door closed in their face. He still leaned against the kitchen counter while she made tea and said things like, "You seem weird lately." What's going on with genuine puzzlement, as though the concept of her withdrawing from him was a malfunction rather than a choice. She blocked his number the second week of June. She did it at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, sitting on her bedroom floor with her back against the bed. And she held her phone for a long time after, expecting to feel something dramatic. Instead, she felt the same thing she'd felt sitting at the kitchen table the morning after graduation. A thread loosening. She threw away the birthday gift he had given her 6 months ago. A bracelet she had worn every single day since, that she had told herself was just a gift between friends, because she was not the kind of person to read too much into things, even while reading everything into it. It went into the trash with the kind of finality that felt almost ceremonial. She changed the security code on the house. Her mother noticed and didn't ask questions, which meant she probably understood more than she had ever said out loud, which was a conversation Lillian filed away for later. And then, through Clara, she found out about the Arctic. Clara's older cousin was leading a 3-week expedition for a small group of college-age women, research trip, Northern Lights season, physically demanding, emotionally clarifying in the way only truly remote places can be. One spot had opened up last minute. Clara was going. Did Lillian want to come? Lillian said yes before Clara finished the sentence. 3 weeks later, she was standing on a sheet of ice that stretched so far in every direction it stopped having edges, watching curtains of green and violet light fold and unfold above her head with the unhurried majesty of something that had been doing this long before human beings existed to feel small beneath it. She had not thought about Dante in 4 days. That might sound like nothing. To Lillian, standing there in the cold with her breath making small clouds and the ice creaking somewhere beneath her boots, it felt like the first lungful of air after a very long time underwater. She was not healed. She knew that. She had gone from loving someone completely to discovering the love had been built on a floor that wasn't there, and that kind of renovation doesn't happen in 3 weeks. She still reached for her phone sometimes with the instinct to call him. She still had moments, usually around 2 a.m., when the grief arrived without announcement, and she had to just sit with it until it passed. But standing under those lights, surrounded by women who were tired and cold and laughing about it, she felt something else arriving alongside the grief, something that had been waiting for space. Herself. She had been so busy being Dante's Lillian that she had stopped being just Lillian for so long she'd almost forgotten what that felt like. It felt like this: cold hands, aching legs, a vast sky doing impossible things overhead, and a future so wide open it was almost frightening. She chose not to be frightened. She chose it deliberately, standing on the ice, the northern lights folding above her like a gift she had not earned and did not need to earn. It was simply there, enormous and indifferent and beautiful, for anyone willing to make the trip. She was going to MIT in the fall. She was going alone. And for the first time, alone felt like the right word for where she was going. Back home, she heard through the neighborhood grapevine. She was still, after all, a human being with ears and connections. That Dante had been calling her number and getting no response. That he had actually driven past her house twice in 1 week, which she knew because her mother mentioned it casually over dinner with the careful neutrality of a woman choosing not to have a specific conversation. He had told Marco she was being dramatic. Marco, to his credit, had apparently said nothing. Whether that was loyalty to Dante or guilt about what he had participated in that morning, Lillian didn't know and had decided not to spend energy figuring out. Some things were not worth the excavation. Marco was her brother, and she loved him, and she would deal with whatever existed between them later, in private, in her own time. What mattered was that Dante's confusion was apparently growing. He couldn't understand it. That was the part that would have been funny if it hadn't cost her so much. The sheer, genuine bafflement of a man whose certainty about another person had been so total that her absence genuinely registered as a kind of malfunction in the natural order. He had been so sure she would always be there. He had been so sure she would wait. And she had spent 10 years making sure he had every reason to believe that. She did not regret the 10 years. She had loved him as honestly as she knew how, and she was not going to rewrite that into something shameful just because it turned out he hadn't been loving her back with the same currency. Her love had been real. That was hers. The damage he had done with it was his. What she regretted was the near miss of a future she had been about to build on sand. She thought about that sometimes, and the cold clarity of it steadied her. She had almost given MIT up. She had almost followed him to Hartfield. She had almost spent 4 more years orbiting his life, waiting for the version of him that only appeared in private, late at night, when he was being generous with his warmth. Almost. She packed for Boston in August, carefully and without ceremony, the way you pack for somewhere you intend to stay. Her mother hugged her at the door for a long time without saying anything, and Lillian hugged her back, and neither of them cried, which was probably the most love they had ever communicated without words. She did not say goodbye to Dante. He did not know she was leaving. She drove away on a Thursday morning with 2 suitcases and a backpack and the acceptance letter she had kept folded in her jacket pocket for 6 months, like a secret she had needed to keep even from herself. She did not look in the rearview mirror at the house next door. She had decided, somewhere between the Arctic ice and her mother's kitchen, that she was done looking backward at things she was walking away from. She had a future to get to, and it was going to be entirely, completely, unapologetically hers. MIT did not care about Lillian Ashcroft's broken heart. That was the first thing she learned. The campus received her the way it received everyone, with the flat, institutional indifference of a place that had processed thousands of brilliant, damaged, hopeful people before her and would process thousands more after. Nobody knew her name yet. Nobody knew she had driven 8 hours with her jaw clenched and her hands tight on the wheel and a playlist she hadn't actually been listening to running in the background. Nobody knew that 3 weeks ago she had been sleeping in Dante Moretti's bed, believing she was loved. She was just a student ID number and a dorm room assignment. She found that extraordinarily comforting. Her room was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and old carpet, with a window that looked out onto a narrow courtyard where pigeons congregated with the self-important energy of birds that had nowhere to be. Her roommate, a girl named Priya from Houston, was already there when Lillian arrived, assembling a small shelf with a hex wrench and the focused expression of someone who did not need assistance but would accept it if offered. "I'm Lillian," Lillian said from the doorway, a suitcase in each hand. Priya looked up, assessed her in 2 seconds. "You want the left side or the right?" "Left." "Good. I already claimed the right one. The left gets better afternoon light, though, so you actually won." That was it. No awkward getting-to-know-you ceremony, no elaborate negotiation of shared space, just 2 people agreeing on the basic logistics of coexistence, which turned out to be exactly the register Lillian needed to begin the rest of her life. She unpacked in silence while Priya finished the shelf, and somewhere in the middle of that ordinary, quiet activity, folding sweaters, arranging toiletries, deciding where her desk lamp should go, something in Lillian's chest loosened another fraction. She was here. She had actually done it. The first month was hard in all the ways she had expected, and none of the ways she hadn't. The coursework was genuinely brutal. MIT had a way of taking everything you thought you knew about your own intelligence and running it through a very precise machine that showed you exactly where your gaps were. Lillian's gaps were real. She had always been strong in mathematics and systems thinking, but the pace here operated on a different clock than anything she had trained for, and the first few weeks required a complete recalibration of how she studied, how she slept, and how she allocated the limited resource of her attention. She adapted. It took effort, and 2 failed problem sets and 1 conversation with a teaching assistant who was, thank God, the kind of person who explained things without making you feel stupid for needing the explanation. But she adapted. What she hadn't expected was the silence. Not actual silence. MIT was a loud campus, full of people who thought quickly and talked fast and moved through space with the kinetic energy of people who had things to prove. What she hadn't expected was the silence inside her own head where Dante used to live. For 10 years, he had occupied a specific room in her mind. Not always loudly, sometimes just a background hum, the low-grade awareness of someone you love that you carry without noticing, the way you carry your own heartbeat. She had grown so accustomed to his presence in her thoughts that his absence now felt almost like a sensory deprivation. She noticed it most at night, in that window between putting her phone down and falling asleep, when her brain had nothing left to process and would previously have defaulted to him. What was he doing? What he had said last time she saw him? What the next conversation might look like? Now there was just space. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was space. And she was smart enough to understand that space was the prerequisite for whatever came next. She called her mother on Sundays. She talked to Clara occasionally, carefully navigating around the specific landmines of their shared social world back home. She studied. She slept badly for 3 weeks and then started sleeping better. She found a coffee shop 12 minutes from campus that made a specific kind of cardamom latte that she developed a complicated emotional relationship with over the course of the fall semester. She did not think about Dante, or rather, she thought about him the way you think about a scar. Not constantly, not painfully, but sometimes your fingers find it in the dark and you remember exactly what made it. What she did not know, could not know, was what was happening 600 miles southwest of her cardamom latte. The Moretti Empire had its own rhythms, its own calendar of events and obligations, and ceremonial displays of power that the family coordinated with the precision of people who understood that appearances were not separate from reality. They were a component of it. The autumn announcement, the formal introduction of Dante as the designated successor to his father, was one of these events. It had been planned for months. A dinner, a gathering of the families that made up the Moretti network, a night designed to communicate one clear message. The next generation was ready. It was, by all accounts, a significant occasion, and Dante walked into it with Vivian Cross on his arm, which was fine, which was what everyone expected, which should have felt like winning. He stood in a room full of people who feared him and flattered him, and watched him with the careful attention of people calculating their own futures against his. And he shook hands and said the right things, and smiled the way his father had taught him to smile. Controlled, warm enough to seem genuine, never reaching his eyes when he didn't intend it to. At some point during the evening, someone asked him about Lillian Ashcroft. He didn't know why the name landed on him the way it did. One of the older men, a family associate who had watched them both grow up in the neighborhood, asked casually, "How's the Ashcroft girl doing? She go off to school somewhere?" With the idle curiosity of someone making conversation. Dante said he thought she was at Hartfield. The man shook his head. "No, I heard she went to MIT. Real shame she left the neighborhood. She was a sharp one, that girl." Dante's expression did not change. He was good at that. A lifetime of training in environments where showing the wrong thing at the wrong moment had consequences had made him excellent at keeping his face neutral while his interior registered something else entirely. But Marco was standing 3 feet away and saw the fractional pause before Dante responded, and Marco said nothing, and Dante said nothing, and the conversation moved on the way conversations do. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Vivian was upstairs asleep, and Dante was sitting alone in his father's study with a glass of something he wasn't tasting, he thought about it. MIT. Lillian had not followed him to Hartfield. Lillian, who had rearranged her entire university plan to attend the same school as him, or so he had assumed. Lillian, who had always been there, whose presence he had stopped registering consciously the way you stop registering the furniture in a room you've lived in too long. Lillian was at MIT. She had not told him. She had not called to say goodbye. She had not, and this was the part that snagged on something he couldn't name and wouldn't yet examine, she had not done anything he would have predicted her doing. He picked up his phone. He went to her contact. He had noticed, at some point in July, that his calls weren't going through, but he had written it off as a technical issue, because the alternative interpretation required him to accept something about the situation that his pride was not prepared to accept. The call went to a generic voicemail message. Not her voice. Just a computer reading back the number. She had changed her phone number. He set the phone down on the desk and looked at it for a while. The grandfather clock in the corner marked 11, then 11:15. He did not go upstairs. Vivian noticed. Vivian had always been perceptive. It was one of the things that distinguished her. The ability to read a room, to read a person, to identify what was being concealed and file it away for potential future use. It was a quality Dante had found attractive initially because it mirrored his own, two people who watched everything and revealed selectively. What he hadn't fully understood until he was living with it daily was that this quality, applied to the relationship itself, meant that very little between them could remain unexamined. She brought it up on a Sunday morning in October with the particular calm of a woman who has been thinking about something for a while. "You've been checking your phone more than usual," she said. She wasn't looking at him. She was reading something, sprawled across the couch with her legs over the armrest, which was a posture she adopted when she wanted to seem relaxed while actually being very focused. "What are you looking for?" "Nothing," Dante said. "You're not great at nothing," she said, turning a page. "You have a look when you're doing nothing. You're not doing it right now." Vivian. "I'm just observing." She looked up. "Is it Lillian?" The name in her mouth was a specific kind of weapon. Casual, almost affectionate, shaped like innocence. Vivian had always been generous about Lillian, in public, in the easy way of someone who considers a rival so thoroughly defeated that graciousness costs nothing. "Why would it be Lillian?" Dante said. It was not a question. "Because she disappeared," Vivian said simply. "And you don't like things that disappear without your permission." The accuracy of that landed somewhere uncomfortable. And Dante responded to discomfort the way he always had, by moving past it without acknowledging it. She went to school, he said. People go to school. She went to MIT, Vivian said. Which is interesting because 6 months ago she was enrolled at Hartfield, which is where you are, which she changed without mentioning it to anyone. How do you know that? Vivian set her reading down. Because I know everything, Dante. That's always been the deal. She held his gaze steadily. I'm not threatened by Lillian Ashcroft. I just want to make sure you know whether you are. The silence that followed was the specific quality of silence between two people who know each other well enough to understand exactly what is and isn't being said. I'm not threatened by anything, Dante said. Vivian picked her reading back up. Good, she said. Then there's nothing to talk about. But there was. And they both knew it. And the knowing sat between them for the rest of that morning, like something neither of them was ready to name. November arrived with the kind of gray, wet cold that settles into Boston like an old grudge. Lillian had acquired a proper coat by then, the kind she never would have needed back home, heavy and waterproof and completely unromantic, which she had purchased from a discount shop near campus with the grim practicality of someone who had learned from one sufficiently miserable rain-soaked Tuesday. She had also acquired a study group, 3 of them, herself, Priya, and a third-year named James who had adopted them with the cheerful condescension of someone who had already survived the worst of what they were currently facing and found them entertaining. James was from Chicago, talked too fast, made excellent terrible jokes, and had an ability to explain differential equations in ways that made sudden intuitive sense, which was the most valuable skill Lillian had encountered in 6 months. She also met Adrian Brooks in November. Not the way she would later tell the story. She would later edit it into a meeting that sounded more intentional than it was, because the truth was banal. She ran into him in the coffee shop, literally, because she was reading her phone while walking, and he was standing up from a table at the exact wrong moment, and her cardamom latte went directly onto his jacket. He said, "Oh," very calmly. She said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Extremely not calmly, already reaching for napkins, already embarrassed in the specific way of someone whose default is self-possession and who therefore finds the loss of it disproportionately mortifying. "It's fine," he said. He was taller than her, medium build, with reading glasses she had apparently knocked slightly sideways on impact. He straightened them with one finger. "I was going to spill it myself eventually. I always do." "That's very generous." "Or pessimistic." He looked at the jacket. "It's dark enough that it might not show." "It's absolutely going to show." He looked back at her. He had the kind of face that took a moment to read, not because it was blank, but because there was too much in it to process quickly. Glasses, steady eyes, the look of someone who spent a lot of time thinking and had gotten comfortable with that. "Adrian Brooks," he said, holding out his hand. "Lillian Ashcroft." She shook it. "I owe you a coffee." "You owe me a coffee and a jacket cleaning," he said. "But I'll take the coffee now and bill you for the jacket later." He never actually billed her for the jacket. They had coffee that afternoon, then again the following Thursday, and by December it had become a standing arrangement that neither of them formalized but both of them expected, which was how Lillian had learned to recognize the beginning of something real, not in declarations but in the comfortable weight of small consistencies. She was not in love with Adrian in December. She was not ready to be in love with anyone in December. But she liked him with the specific quality of liking that is the honest precursor to something deeper. She liked who she was when she was with him, which is a different and more reliable thing than simply liking a person. She told him almost nothing about Dante. A passing reference once, there was someone back home, it didn't work out. And Adrian asked no follow-up questions, which she appreciated enormously. Not because she needed to hide it, but because she was still in the process of finishing that chapter and she did not want to narrate it before she had actually closed it. The closing came in January. Not because Dante appeared, not because anything dramatic occurred. It came through Marco. Marco called her on a Tuesday evening when she was in the middle of reworking a problem set, and she almost didn't answer because she had been in the process of not answering Marco since August, and the habit had become comfortable. But something made her pick up. Some vestigial sibling instinct, maybe. Or maybe just the particular way he called twice in a row, which he only did when he meant it. "Hey," he said when she picked up. "Hey," she said. A pause. Marco had never been good with silences. He always moved to fill them, which meant if he was sitting with one, something was wrong. "I heard you're doing well up there," he said finally. "I'm doing fine." "Good." Another pause. "Lillian, Marco, if you're calling to explain, I'm not." His voice was tired, genuinely tired, not performed. "I'm not calling to explain anything. I know what I did. I stood there and I let him say those things, and I didn't tell you, and I told myself it was because it wasn't my business to get involved, and that's garbage, and I know it's garbage." He stopped. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. That's it. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it." Lillian was quiet for a long moment. The problem set was still open in front of her. One of the pigeons in the courtyard was making noise about something. The radiator in the corner clicked and hissed the way it always did at exactly this hour. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, you forgive me, or okay, you heard me?" "Okay, I heard you, Marco. The other part is going to take time." "Yeah." He sounded like he had expected that. "That's fair." Then quietly, "He's been asking about you." She had been waiting for this, in the back of her mind, and she had already decided what she would do when it arrived. "I know," she said. "He doesn't know you knew, about what he said. He thinks you just—" "I know what he thinks," Lillian said. "That's fine. Let him think it." "Lillian, Marco." Her voice was steady. Not cold, not angry, just finished. "I'm okay. I'm genuinely okay. But I need you to not bring him to me. Whatever he's feeling, whatever he thinks is happening, that's not my problem anymore, okay?" A long silence. "Okay," Marco said. They talked for a few more minutes about things that didn't matter, their parents, the neighborhood, whether the sandwich place on the corner had finally closed, normal things, sibling things. Then she said goodnight and hung up and sat with her phone in her hands for a moment. She noticed she felt very little. Not numbness, she knew what numbness felt like, and this wasn't it. This was more like the feeling after a long walk, when your body is tired and your mind is quiet and the distance you have covered is visible in a way it wasn't while you were covering it. She had come very far. She turned back to her problem set. Spring semester was better. Spring semester was genuinely, unexpectedly good. Lillian stopped waiting for the grief to ambush her and found that it mostly didn't anymore. There were still moments, a song, a specific quality of light in the late afternoon. Once an overheard conversation in the dining hall where two people were arguing in Italian, and the sound of it hit her like a small, unexpected wave. But they passed. They passed the way everything passes when you stop bracing against it. She was excelling academically by April. Not just keeping up, genuinely distinguishing herself in the ways that get noticed, that get your name on professors' lists, that start to build the early architecture of a serious career. She had a particular talent for systems analysis that her advisor described, in a meeting that left her oddly emotional on the walk home, as one of the most intuitive he had seen in 15 years of teaching. She and Adrian were spending 3 evenings a week together by March. They had not labeled anything. She was not ready to label anything, but she was aware, in the careful and honest way she was aware of most things about herself, that she was developing feelings that were not casual. Adrian Brooks was not like Dante in any way that mattered. He was not magnetic the way Dante was magnetic. He did not command rooms, did not carry the specific gravity of a man who has been told since childhood that he matters enormously. He was smart and patient and occasionally funny in the dry way that sneaks up on you, and he showed up consistently and asked her questions he was actually interested in the answers to. And he had never once made her feel like she was competing for a version of him he was only willing to distribute in small doses. I was, in short, someone she could actually trust. She was learning, slowly, what that felt like, how different it felt from what she had mistaken for it before. In April, the Moretti world found its way to her door. Not literally. Through social media, which Lillian had maintained a careful, minimal presence on, enough to stay connected to people she actually cared about, not enough to perform a version of herself for an audience. She had Vivian's account blocked. She had Dante's blocked. She had not gone looking. But Clara was not blocked. And Clara, who was well-meaning in the way of someone who can't help narrating what she witnesses, sent her a screenshot with the message, "Okay, I know you said you didn't want to know things, but I think you should see this before someone less careful sends it to you." It was Vivian's social media, a photograph. A vacation somewhere warm, the two of them, Dante and Vivian, on what appeared to be a balcony above blue water. Vivian in a white dress, leaning back against him, his arms around her waist, the caption something about adventure and chosen people, and the kind of declarative happiness that is always at least partially performance. Lillian looked at it for a long time. She noticed what she felt and what she didn't feel. What she felt: a distant, dull ache, old and fading. The last ember of something that had been a fire and was no longer. What she didn't feel: the thing she had always feared she would feel. The devastation, the collapse, the proof that she couldn't survive it. She sent Clara a message that said, "Thank you, I'm okay, really," and meant both parts of it. Then she put her phone in her bag and walked across campus to meet Adrian for coffee. He was already there when she arrived, 2 cups on the table, reading something on his laptop with his glasses sliding down his nose the way they always did because he never pushed them up until they were practically at the tip. He looked up when she sat down. "You okay?" he said. He was perceptive in a quiet way, not the sharp, calculating perceptiveness of someone looking for leverage, just the attentiveness of a person who actually looked at the people in front of them. "Yeah," she said. And then, because she was done with half-truths and strategic silences as a general policy, "Someone sent me a photo of my ex and my old best friend. I'm fine, but I'm processing." Adrian took this in. "Do you want to talk about it, or do you want to talk about something else entirely?" She thought about it honestly. "Something else entirely." "Okay." He turned his laptop toward her. "Tell me what's wrong with this load-bearing calculation, because I've been staring at it for an hour, and something is off, and I cannot figure out what." She looked at it, found the error in about 90 seconds. He stared at her. "You're absurd," he said, not unkindly. "I know," she said, and drank her coffee, and felt the day settle back into something manageable. Summer came and went. Lillian stayed in Boston, took 2 intensive courses, worked a research position that was underpaid and exhausting and exactly what she needed. She went back home for 2 weeks in August, slept in her own bed, ate her mother's cooking, and avoided the east side of the neighborhood with the practiced ease of someone who has simply incorporated a geographic adjustment into their daily routing without making it into a statement. She did not see Dante. She heard, through the neighborhood's ambient social information network, that things between him and Vivian were not as photographically perfect as they appeared online. This came from multiple directions. Her mother's carefully neutral observation that the Moretti boy seemed tense lately, a comment from an old classmate at a casual reunion dinner, Marco's silence on the subject when she asked him directly how everyone was doing, which was its own kind of answer. She did not feel satisfied by this. She had expected to, back when she was standing at the kitchen sink in June and blocking his number and telling herself that somewhere in the future this information would feel like justice. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like weather, something happening in a place she no longer lived, affecting people whose lives were no longer threaded through hers. She drove back to Boston on a Thursday morning. She called Adrian from a rest stop somewhere in Connecticut, partly because she wanted to tell him her ETA and partly because she had gotten into the habit of calling him when she had long stretches of empty road, because he talked in a way that made long drives feel shorter. "How's home?" he asked. "Home is fine," she said. Home is exactly the same, which is somehow always both comforting and a little terrifying. The terrifying part being that it reminds you how much you've changed without actually changing the backdrop. A brief pause on his end. "That's a good way to put it. I have my moments." "You have considerably more than your moments," he said. "Drive safe. Text me when you get in." She said she would, and she did. And when she got back to her apartment, she had moved out of the dorms that summer. She sat down on her floor surrounded by her bags and looked around the space she had made and felt something she could only identify as rightness. The particular feeling of a life that has been built rather than inherited. She had built this, badly in places, with wrong turns and grief and more late nights than her body would have chosen, but genuinely hers. She did not know, arriving back in Boston that August, that 1,000 miles away. Dante Moretti had ended things with Vivian Cross 3 weeks earlier in a conversation that went badly and ended with a slammed door and a silence that had not yet been broken. She did not know that he had picked up his phone 6 times that month, with some dim and inarticulate impulse toward a number that no longer existed, that would no longer connect to her. She did not know that Marco had finally, quietly, told him the truth. Not all of it. Not the Italian conversation. Marco did not know the extent of what Lillian had understood. But enough. She changed her plans, Dante. Before the prom. She heard something and she made a decision and she left and she didn't come back and she is not coming back. Dante had gone quiet in the specific way of someone registering damage. What did she hear? He had asked. And Marco, who was a better person when Lillian was not in the room to make him feel small in comparison, had looked at the man he had known since childhood and said, I think you know. What Lillian did know, was about to know, was what happened at the end of October, when the Moretti Empire made a decision that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the family's annual business in the city, and Dante came to Boston. She first became aware of it the way you become aware of a change in weather, not by seeing anything directly, but by the subtle shift in atmosphere. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing someone who looked like Dante near campus, which she dismissed. Then Clara, visiting for a long weekend, went very still at a particular coffee shop window and said very carefully, Lillian, don't look immediately, but I think… Lillian looked. He was across the street, standing on the sidewalk in a coat she didn't recognize, talking on a phone he held to his ear with one hand while the other was in his pocket. The posture was exactly the same, the casual command of space, the way he stood like he had paid for the pavement beneath his feet. He was thinner than she remembered, or maybe just different, the softness of adolescence completely gone now, replaced by something harder and more considered. He had not seen her. Clara grabbed her hand under the table. Lillian's heart was doing something undignified. She sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of the old thing, the old pull, the decade-long gravity of him. And then she breathed out and picked up her coffee and said very calmly, Let's go out the back. Are you sure? Clara said. Completely, Lillian said. They left through the back of the coffee shop and walked around the block and did not look back, and Lillian's heart slowed to normal before they had reached the corner. And that more than anything was how she knew where she actually stood. But Dante turned around 15 minutes later, scanning the street with the look of someone who had thought, for a fraction of a second, that he had seen something he recognized. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time. He had been in Boston 3 days already, and he would later admit to Marco, months later, after everything else had happened, that the work he had ostensibly come here for had taken approximately 4 hours to complete, and the remaining time had been spent doing something he refused to name directly. He was looking for her. He had been looking for her since August, since the night Marco had sat across from him with that specific expression of a man delivering news. He should have delivered much sooner, since the moment he had finally assembled the pieces into a shape he could no longer disassemble through convenient inattention. He stood on the sidewalk until a bodyguard said something quietly in his ear, and then he moved, and the city moved around him. And somewhere across town, Lillian Ashcroft was walking beside her friend through the cool October air, and the distance between them was 600 feet in several lifetimes, and only one of them was aware that the other was this close, and the one who was aware had just chosen, deliberately and consciously, to walk in the opposite direction. The point of no return was not a dramatic moment. It did not announce itself with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, on a sidewalk in October, in the space between a man searching and a woman who was done being found by him. And in that space, something that had been possible for 10 years became, finally and permanently, impossible. Dante went back to his hotel. Lillian went home to her apartment. Neither of them slept well that night, but only one of them understood why. He came back in November. Not for business this time. He didn't even try to construct that particular fiction for himself, which was, in its own way, a form of progress. Dante Moretti had spent the better part of 2 years telling himself convenient stories about his own motivations, and he was getting tired of the maintenance required to keep them standing. He told his father he had loose ends in Boston. His father, who had built an empire on the ability to read people with surgical accuracy, looked at him for a long moment over the breakfast table and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Dante took 2 men with him, traveled light, stayed at a hotel downtown rather than the usual suite, kept his schedule deliberately open. He had no plan. This was unusual. He operated almost exclusively through planning, contingencies layered on contingencies. Every conversation entered with a map of its possible directions already drawn. The absence of a plan made him feel exposed in a way he didn't have a name for. He found her the second day, not through searching, or not through the obvious kind. He had, quietly and without examining his reasons too closely, asked Marco for her campus schedule under the guise of general concern, and Marco had provided it with the expression of someone handing over a loaded weapon to a person they were not confident would use it responsibly. She was crossing the main quad at 11:15 in the morning, alone, moving with the focused, purposeful stride of someone who knows exactly where they're going and is mildly annoyed at the speed of the world around them. She had a bag over one shoulder and a coffee cup in the other hand, and she was wearing that enormous, ugly waterproof coat he had heard about secondhand from Marco in a way that suggested Marco had found it amusing, and she looked completely fine. That was what hit him first, and it hit him harder than he had anticipated. He had constructed, without meaning to, a version of Lillian in Boston that involved some visible evidence of damage, some hollowness around the eyes, some quality of diminishment that would confirm he had mattered enough to leave a mark. What he had not prepared himself for was this: a woman walking through a November morning like she owned the ground she was covering, like she had somewhere important to be and was genuinely interested in getting there. She had not been waiting. She had not been diminished. She was visibly and undeniably living a life. He said her name. She stopped. The pause before she turned was approximately 2 seconds. He would think about those 2 seconds later, what they cost her, whether they cost her anything, whether the composure he saw when she finally turned around was real or constructed. He couldn't tell. That was new. He had always been able to read Lillian. "Dante," she said. Not "what are you doing here?" Not "how did you find me?" Just his name, flat and without inflection, the way you say the name of something you have identified and categorized and are no longer surprised by. "I was in the area," he said, which was such a transparent inadequacy that he saw something flicker across her face. Not quite amusement, not quite contempt, something between the two. "Okay," she said. "Can we talk?" She looked at him for a moment. The coffee cup was in her right hand and she was holding it at a slight angle, the way people hold things when they're deciding whether to stay or go. "I have class in 40 minutes, she said. "I only need 20. Another pause. He had the sudden, uncomfortable sensation of being assessed the way he assessed other people, quickly, efficiently, with a conclusion already forming before the evaluation was technically complete. "There's a bench," she said. "Over there, 20 minutes. They sat with approximately 18 inches between them, which was close enough to be civil and far enough to be a position statement. He had prepared things to say. During the flight, during the cab ride, during the 45 minutes he had spent that morning in his hotel room, going over the landscape of the conversation the way he mapped business meetings. And now, sitting beside her on a cold bench in November, while students moved past them in both directions, all of it seemed inadequate in a way he couldn't immediately repair. "You changed your number," he said. This was not what he had planned to lead with. "I did," she said. "You didn't tell me you were coming here." "No," she agreed. "Why?" She looked at him with an expression that was almost patient. "Because I didn't want to tell you." "That's not—" He stopped himself, started again. "Lillian, I've been trying to reach you for over a year." "I know." "You know." "Marco told me," she said simply. The name landed with a small, specific weight. He absorbed it. "What else did Marco tell you?" "Enough," she said. "What does that mean?" She turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd sat down, and he felt the shift. The quality of attention she was now directing at him was not hostile, but it was not warm. And the combination produced something he had almost no experience navigating. A version of Lillian that was entirely self-contained, that wanted nothing from him, that was engaging with this conversation the way you engage with something you have already made peace with. "It means I know you've been asking about me," she said. "And I know things aren't the same between you and Vivian, and I know you're here." She looked away again. "None of that changes anything." "I made mistakes," he said. "Yes." "I treated you badly." "Yes," she said again, the same tone, the same flat acknowledgement, like she was agreeing that the weather was cold. "I need you to—" He stopped. He hadn't planned this part. He had planned an apology, a real one, but what he hadn't planned was what came after the apology, what he was actually asking for, what he wanted from her that could be articulated in 20 minutes on a bench between her classes. "I need you to know that I understand what I did," he said finally. "I think you understand some of it," she said quietly. "I don't think you understand all of it yet." "Then tell me." She was quiet for a moment. A group of students passed nearby, laughing about something, their voices rising and then fading, and in the space between their laughter and the returning silence, Lillian looked at her coffee cup and then back at the middle distance. "Not today," she said. "When?" She stood up, shouldered her bag, looked down at him with the particular expression of someone who is being kind in a way that does not require tenderness. "I don't know, Dante. Maybe not ever. I haven't decided." She paused. "I hope you have a safe trip home." She walked away. He sat on the bench for 11 minutes after she left, which one of his men, hovering at a respectful distance, clocked with professional accuracy and mentioned to no one. The thing about Dante Moretti was that he had never learned to process defeat quietly. He had learned to conceal it. His father had been an excellent teacher in the specific art of absorbing failure without visibly flinching, of turning losses into information rather than wounds. He could perform equilibrium. He had been performing it his entire adult life. But underneath the performance, in the private machinery of how he actually operated, he dealt with things he couldn't control by increasing pressure in another direction. He went back to the hotel, made 3 calls he had been putting off, ate a room service dinner he didn't taste, and then he made a 4th call to a contact who did specialized information work for the Moretti family, the kind of work that operated in the gray area between research and surveillance, and asked, carefully, and with the particular phrasing of a man who knows how to ask for things without saying exactly what he's asking for a more detailed picture of Lillian Ashcroft's life at MIT. He got the picture within 48 hours. Her class schedule, her research position, her apartment building, her social patterns, such as they were, coffee shop frequented, study group, a group of friends she appeared with regularly, and Adrian Brooks. The contact was thorough. 3 photographs, a brief summary, 3rd-year engineering student, academic record, mutual appearances at campus events. The summary was neutral, factual, the kind of assessment you'd give about a business associate. Dante looked at the photographs for a long time. He told himself it was information gathering. That's all this was. Understanding the landscape. He flew home the next morning. December arrived, and with it the specific pressure of the holidays, which in the Moretti household functioned less like a celebration and more like an extended business exercise in which family loyalty was displayed, alliances were maintained, and the performance of normalcy was executed with the precision of a military operation. Dante moved through it on autopilot. He had stopped seeing Vivian entirely, which caused its own set of repercussions. She was not the kind of woman who accepted being set aside without making the cost of that visible, and the cost was social, logistical, uncomfortable in the particular ways that only someone with detailed knowledge of your life can make uncomfortable. She said things, when they encountered each other at mutual social obligations, that were designed to land precisely. She had always been good at that. At a family associate's Christmas party in mid-December, she found him near the bar with the unerring accuracy of a woman who has been tracking someone's position in a room while appearing to do no such thing, and she said, quietly enough that no one around them could hear, "You went to Boston to find her." He said nothing. "And it didn't go the way you planned," Vivian said, "because nothing with Lillian ever goes the way you plan. That's actually always been her thing." She took a sip of her champagne. Her voice was composed in the specific way of someone who has cried about something already and finished with it and arrived on the other side at something cooler and more considered. "She doesn't react the way other people react. She never has. I've known her since 7th grade, and I still could never fully predict her. Vivian, I'm not here to fight with you," she said. "I'm just observing." She looked at him with something that was weirdly, almost sympathetic. "You treated her like she was guaranteed, Dante. Like a fixed point. Like no matter what you did, she'd still be in the same place when you got around to looking." She set her glass down. "She was never a fixed point. You just convinced yourself she was because it was convenient." She walked away and left him standing there with his drink. He didn't respond because there was nothing to respond with. She was right. The accuracy of it was not the satisfying clarity of an insight received willingly, but the specific discomfort of a mirror held at an angle you've been avoiding. January. A new semester. 5,300 kilometers between them. Lillian was not thinking about Dante. She was, with the determined focus of someone who has identified exactly what she wants and is in the process of building the infrastructure to get there, thinking about her second-year thesis proposal, her research position, a conference in March that her advisor had suggested she submit a paper to, and Adrian. She was thinking about Adrian considerably. They had spent New Year's Eve together, which had not been a planned declaration, but had evolved naturally from an evening that had started with a study session that wasn't really a study session and ended at midnight with the two of them on the roof of his apartment building, watching the city mark its own transition with noise and light. He had kissed her at midnight, which she had been waiting for him to do for approximately 6 weeks, and which had been different from every kiss she had experienced in the sense that it was simple. No performance in it, no message being sent to an audience, no significance being constructed in real time. Just him kissing her because he wanted to, in the cold, on a roof, while the city was loud beneath them. She had told him, that night, more than she had told him before. Not everything, she was not ready to hand him the full archaeology of Dante Moretti all at once, but enough. The 10 years. The night before graduation. The Italian she wasn't supposed to understand. He had listened without interrupting, which was harder than it sounds, and which she noticed. "That's a long time to carry something like that," he said when she finished. "It doesn't feel that heavy anymore," she said. "It did for a while. What does it feel like now?" She thought about it honestly, the way she had gotten into the habit of thinking about things since she had stopped filtering her own thoughts for palatability. "Like something that happened to a younger version of me," she said. "I feel for her, but I'm not her anymore." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "That's a healthy place to be." "I know," she said. "It took work to get there." "I can imagine." She looked at him. "He came to see me in November." Something shifted in his expression, a fractional tightening, controlled. "You didn't mention that." "I know. I wasn't ready to." She turned back to the city lights. "It didn't change anything. That's why I didn't mention it, because it was actually just evidence that I'd moved past it. He showed up and I sat with him for 20 minutes, and it was just sad. For him, I mean. He was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was confused, like a person who's reached for something in the same drawer for years and one day the drawer isn't there." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is he going to keep coming back?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "And if he does?" She looked at him. "Then I'll handle it, same way I handled November." She held his gaze. "You don't need to worry about it." "I'm not worried," he said. And then more quietly, "I'm not nothing, Lillian. I know what I am and what I'm not. I just don't want to be a surprise to either of us." She understood what he was asking. It was not a territorial question. It wasn't, "Are you over him?" in the possessive sense. It was something more careful than that. "Are you here? Are you actually here?" "I'm here," she said, simply and without drama. "I promise you I'm here." He nodded once, looked back at the city. They stayed on the roof until the cold became genuinely impractical, and then they went inside, and that was how they began. Not with declarations, but with cold air and honesty and a mutual agreement to be exactly where they were. February brought the thing that broke the relative peace of the new year. It started with a phone call from Marco that came in at 7:15 in the morning, which was wrong enough in itself. Marco operated on no schedule that resembled normal human rhythms and would never call before 10 if he could help it, that Lillian answered it before she was fully awake. "Something happened," he said. She sat up. "What?" Dante found out about Adrian. She went completely still. "What do you mean found out? It's not a secret." "He had someone—" Marco paused. She could hear him choosing his words. "He asked someone to look into your life up there. Not in a— I mean, he's not going to do anything, Lillian. It's not that. But he knows who Adrian is. He has information. And he's—" Another pause. "He's not handling it well." The cold that moved through her was not fear exactly. It was something more complex, anger, yes, layered over something that felt almost like the grief of confirmation. That the boy she had loved for 10 years had, in the absence of her love, done exactly what she might have feared he would do. Used the only tools he had ever been given. "He had someone surveil me," she said. Her voice was very flat. I don't know how detailed it was." "Marco, She got out of bed, started moving because staying still was not an option. He had someone surveilling my life, my schedule, my apartment, my... She stopped herself, breathed. Does Adrian know? I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay. She thought rapidly and clearly, the way she thought when a problem set had more variables than expected. How do you know this? Because he told me, Marco said. He was drinking, and he told me about it, and I think part of him knew he was crossing a line because he looked like a man who knew he'd crossed a line but had already crossed it and couldn't uncross it. Where is he now? Here. Home. I think he's planning to come back to Boston. When? Soon. Lillian, I think he's going to go to Adrian directly. The pause that followed was long enough that Marco said her name once, carefully. Don't let him, she said. I can't exactly. Marco. Something in her voice made him go quiet. It was not the voice of the girl he had grown up with. It was not soft. If he goes to Adrian, everything is finished. Every bridge, every conversation we might have eventually had. All of it. You tell him that. From me. You tell him exactly that. Marco said he would. She hung up and stood in her apartment in the early February morning, still in yesterday's clothes because she had fallen asleep on the couch finishing her paper. And she looked at the wall and felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with something older and more fundamental. The specific anger of a woman who has built something carefully, with intention, out of the wreckage of something that was done to her, and who is now watching someone reach toward it with careless, grasping hands. She called Adrian. He answered on the second ring, already awake, already the version of himself that functioned at 7 a.m. because he was aggressively that kind of person. Morning, he said. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you respond. A brief silence. Okay, he said. She told him. Everything, the full version, the one she had been parceling out in careful pieces, beginning with 10 years ago and ending with the phone call she had just gotten. She did not editorialize. She did not soften. She gave him the facts the way she would give someone facts in a research presentation, clearly and in order, because he deserved that. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that she counted her own heartbeats inside it. So he's been having you watched, Adrian said. His voice was entirely level. Apparently, she said. And he knows about me. Yes. And he might come here. I'm trying to prevent that, she said. But I wanted you to know. I didn't want this to arrive as a surprise because I'm not doing that. I'm not managing information to protect your feelings. You deserve the full picture. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, could almost hear him processing. Okay, he said finally. Okay, what? Okay, I have the full picture. He paused. Are you scared? The question surprised her. Not the content, but the delivery, the straightness of it, the absence of performance. Not are you still in love with him, or do you want to see him, or any of the things a less secure person might have reached for first. Just, are you scared? No, she said. And then, because Adrian deserved the full truth, a little, not of him, of what happens when someone who can't accept something goes looking for ways to force it. Yeah, he said. That's the part I'm worried about, too. Dante came on a Thursday. He came without calling, without warning, which might have been a strategy or might have been that he was past the point of strategic thinking on this particular subject. He showed up at the coffee shop, her coffee shop, the one with the cardamom latte, which he knew about because someone had told him, and that specific detail was its own kind of violation, at 9:30 in the morning. He walked in and scanned the room. Lillian was not there. Adrian was. This was not planned. Adrian was there because he went there on Thursdays. He had no idea Dante was in the city. He was sitting at his usual table with his laptop and his coffee and his quietly impressive ability to concentrate in a noisy environment, and he looked up when the door opened. The way you look up at any door. And then he looked again because something in the quality of the man's entrance triggered a recognition that he'd been consciously preparing for. He had seen the photographs Lillian showed him after February. He knew what Dante Moretti looked like. For approximately 4 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Dante crossed the room and stopped at the table, and Adrian closed his laptop and took off his glasses and set them on top of it, and the two men looked at each other with the specific attention of people who have known about each other without meeting and are now conducting a rapid and mutual assessment. "Adrian Brooks," Dante said. "That's me," Adrian said. His voice was completely even. "Dante Moretti." A fractional pause. "She told you about me." "Everything," Adrian said. "You want to sit down?" The question seemed to catch Dante slightly off balance. He had walked in expecting confrontation or absence and gotten neither. He sat. He didn't look comfortable, but he sat. "Where is she?" he asked. "She'll be here in about 20 minutes, Adrian said. "She has a Thursday morning lab that runs until 10. "You know her schedule." "I'm her boyfriend," Adrian said simply. "Yes." The word landed between them. Dante absorbed it the way he absorbed things that cost him something, without visible flinching, but with a slight tightening around the jaw that lasted less than a second. "I need to talk to her," he said. "She knows you're in Boston," Adrian said. "She knew you were coming. I think she's decided whether she wants that conversation." "That's her decision to make," Dante said, with a pointed quality that implied he was drawing a boundary around Adrian's involvement. "Completely agree," Adrian said, matching his tone without matching his edge. "I'm just here for coffee on a Thursday morning. Whatever happens when she gets here is between you two." Dante looked at him with the assessing focus of someone trying to find the angle, the weakness, the leverage point, and finding. Adrian's expression remained entirely unremarkable. Patient, unimpressed, and not hostile. Simply there. "She's happy," Adrian said quietly, after a moment. "Not as a weapon, as a fact. I want you to know that. Whatever you're trying to figure out by being here, she's genuinely happy." Something moved through Dante's face that Adrian would later describe to Lillian, carefully and without embellishment, as the look of a man hearing a verdict. The door of the coffee shop opened. Lillian walked in. She saw them both immediately. Her gaze went to Dante first and then to Adrian, and she stood in the doorway for exactly 1 second, her coat still on, her bag on her shoulder, and in that second she read the entire room with the same rapid accuracy she applied to everything, and her expression did something complicated and then settled. She walked to the table. She did not look at Dante the way she once would have looked at him, with the terrible specific hope of someone waiting for a sign. She looked at him the way you look at something you have already made a decision about. "I told Marco not to let you come," she said. "I know," Dante said. "Sit down, Lillian," Adrian said, and pushed out the chair beside him, and she sat. The three of them were at a small table in a busy coffee shop in Boston, and the morning was moving around them with total indifference, and Dante looked at the two of them, the specific and easy way they occupied the same space, the unconscious adjustment of proximity that belongs only to people who have become genuinely comfortable with each other, and something in his face went through a change that he had never allowed an audience for before. It was not anger. It was not the calculated display of a man performing emotion for effect. It was, plainly and without decoration, grief. "I need to say something," he said. His voice was lower now, different. The performance architecture had come down somewhere between the door and this moment, and what was left was just a man sitting across from two people, one of whom he had destroyed, and one of whom was living proof of what he had lost. "I need to say it directly to you, and I need you to actually hear it, and then I'll leave. I promise I'll leave." Lillian looked at him. "Say it," she said. He looked at his hands, then at her. And the thing he was about to say, the thing that had been building since October, since February, since the morning he had sat in his father's study and listened to the phone ring to a number that no longer existed, rose to the surface like something that has been underwater for a long time and has finally run out of weight to keep it down. "I know you understood Italian," he said. The air in the room did not change. The coffee shop noise did not diminish. The world continued its ordinary operation. But Lillian went completely, utterly still. "I know you were upstairs," Dante said. "I know you heard what I said to Marco that morning. I know you heard everything." His voice was entirely controlled, but the control was costing him something visible. "I've known for about 3 months. Marco told me. Not all of it. I put the rest together myself." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I need you to know that I know. Because everything I've done since showing up in October, having someone look into your life, coming here today, it looks insane without that context. And it is insane. I know it's insane. He looked at her directly. But I needed you to know that I know what I said. And I know what it did. And I'm not here to ask you for anything. He stopped again. Something crossed his face that she had never seen there before. I just couldn't keep going without you knowing that I know. Silence. Adrian was looking at Lillian. Lillian was looking at Dante. And then she said, quietly and without wavering, the 7 words that cost her more than she had anticipated and less than she had feared. I heard every single word you said. Dante closed his eyes. I know, he said. I understood every word, she said. I've spoken Italian since I was 14. I never told you because you never asked. You never asked me anything about myself that you couldn't already answer, Dante. That's the part that isn't just about what you said that morning. That's 10 years. Her voice did not break. It was entirely steady, which was its own form of devastation. You built a version of me in your head, and you loved that version. You loved knowing someone loved you. You loved being sure of me. That's not the same thing as loving me. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something true has been said in a place where truth has been absent for a long time, thick and real and slightly painful to breathe through. Dante opened his eyes. He looked older than he had in October. He looked like a man who had been running a very long distance and had just stopped. I know, he said for the 3rd time. And then, I know, and I'm sorry, and I don't expect that to do anything. I had to say it, to your face, looking at you. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. And then she reached across the table, not to touch him, but to wrap both hands around her coffee cup, which had arrived at some point without her noticing, because this was her coffee shop, and the staff knew her order, and she sat back, and she said, okay. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just okay. I have heard you. I am still here. I am not going to give you the collapse you expected, the one that would make this into the story where you matter more than you do. Okay. Dante looked at Adrian once, briefly, with the expression of a man acknowledging something he wishes were different and has accepted is not. Adrian met it without aggression and without satisfaction. Dante stood up, put on his coat, and then he looked at Lillian one last time, and what was in his face was not the confident, magnetic certainty that had defined every interaction she had ever had with him. It was something much smaller and much more human, and somehow much more devastating. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it, the morning, the years before it, Boston, everything. She nodded once. He left. The door closed behind him, and the coffee shop noise rushed back in to fill the space he had occupied, and Lillian sat very still for a moment with her hands around her cup. Adrian said nothing. He put his glasses back on and reopened his laptop, which was exactly the right thing to do, and she knew it was exactly the right thing, because she had chosen a person who understood when to give her room and when to take up space. And she had chosen that person with the judgment of a woman who had learned, at significant cost, the difference between someone who loved being loved and someone who actually, simply, loved. She looked at the door he had walked through. She waited for the old gravity to pull at her, the decade-long weight of him. It didn't come. What came instead was something so quiet she almost missed it, a kind of settling, deep and final, the feeling of a story reaching its last page, not with drama, but with the ordinary, permanent click of something finished. She turned back to her coffee. You okay? Adrian asked, without looking up from his screen. She considered the question with the honesty she had been practicing for 2 years. Yeah, she said, I actually am. 3 weeks after Dante walked out of the coffee shop, life did what life does when you're not looking. It kept moving. Lillian submitted her conference paper, got accepted. Adrian took her to dinner at a place with cloth napkins and actual candles to celebrate, and she wore the one dress she owned that wasn't primarily functional, and they talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with Dante Moretti or the Moretti Empire or the decade of her life she had spent in its gravitational pull, and that specific evening, that specific 3 hours, felt like the most significant victory she had accumulated in 2 years. She told her mother on a Sunday call that she was happy. Her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, I know, sweetheart. I've been hearing it in your voice for a while now. Lillian didn't cry, but it was close. Spring semester was moving toward its end with the particular acceleration of academic calendars. That sensation of the last 8 weeks arriving suddenly compressed, everything due at once, the days getting longer while the hours somehow shortened. She was presenting her paper in March. She had a research position for the summer already confirmed. She and Adrian had started talking, carefully and without pressure, about what the following year looked like. Not as a declaration, but as a practical conversation between two people who had decided they were building something and wanted to build it intelligently. She was, by any honest accounting, doing extraordinarily well, which is the exact condition life tends to select when it decides to test you. It started with a sound she almost didn't register. She was walking back from the library on a Tuesday evening in early March, dark by 6 o'clock still, the streetlights orange haloed in the cold, her breath making small white clouds that disappeared almost immediately. She had her headphones in, one ear, which was her standard configuration for walking alone at night because she liked music but also liked knowing what was happening around her. A compromise between comfort and the practical awareness of a woman navigating a city after dark. She heard the sound at the edge of her audio. Not music, something else. A sharp crack, like something heavy meeting pavement, followed by voices that were not conversational. She pulled the headphone out. 20 feet ahead, just past the edge of the library's exterior lighting, two men had Adrian against the wall of a building. Her brain processed this in pieces, rapidly and in the wrong order. The way Adrian's glasses were on the ground 3 feet from him, one lens already dark with a crack she could see from here. The way one of the men had a hand in his collar. The way Adrian was not fighting, was standing very still with his hands slightly out. The posture of someone who has assessed a situation and identified stillness as the least dangerous available option. The way the man with his hand in Adrian's collar had the specific bearing of someone employed by people who had been employing people like him for 3 generations. She knew that bearing. She had grown up next to it. "Hey!" Her voice came out louder than she intended, which was fine because loud was what the situation required. She was already moving, already covering the 20 feet, at something that was not quite running but was absolutely not walking, and the two men turned and she got close enough to see their faces before her brain processed the secondary information and delivered it like cold water. She recognized one of them. Not by name, by proximity. He had been one of the men standing at a respectful distance in the coffee shop in February, the ones who trailed Dante like planets orbiting a specific and dangerous sun. "Let him go," she said. The man with his hand in Adrian's collar looked at her with the patience of someone who deals professionally with situations other people find alarming and has developed a comprehensive immunity to the social pressure of being stared at. "Ms. Ashcroft," he said, polite, almost apologetic. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with Mr. Brooks." "Mr. Moretti can speak with me," she said. Her voice was entirely level. She was surprised distantly by how level it was. "Let him go. Now." A pause. The men exchanged a look. Then the hand released Adrian's collar. Adrian straightened, did not reach for his glasses yet, was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not fear, something more controlled than fear, the focused stillness of a person running rapid calculations behind a very careful face. "You okay?" she said to him, not looking away from the two men. "Fine," he said. His voice was steady. "I'm fine." She looked at the one who had spoken. "Tell him I want 5 minutes. Tonight. Wherever he's staying. Just me." She let that sit for 1 second. "And tell him if anyone touches Adrian again, we're done. There's no conversation. There's no anything. He'll never hear from me again in any form. Tell him I said that exactly." The man studied her. "Tell him," she said. He took out his phone. She got the address 20 minutes later. Adrian tried to come with her. This was the conversation she had been least prepared for, the one where she had to stand in the cold on the sidewalk with his cracked glasses in her hand. She had picked them up before they left. And say the thing that she knew was true, but that required him to trust her without being able to explain all the reasons why. "I need to go alone," she said. "Lillian, I know what I'm doing." She looked at him directly. "I know this man. I know how he thinks. If you come with me, it changes the dynamic in a way that makes everything harder and resolves nothing. He needs to have this conversation with me, not with me and you. That's the only way it ends." "It's the only way what ends," Adrian said. "What exactly are you going in there to do?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't know. She knew with absolute clarity. but because articulating it required naming something she hadn't put into words yet, even to herself. Finish it, she said. The real ending. The one that actually sticks. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. He was not the kind of man who needed to control things. She had known this about him from early on, had understood it as one of the fundamental things that made him who he was. But he was also not the kind of man who performed unconcern he didn't feel, and what was on his face right now was genuine concern, barely held in check by a conscious and effortful trust. "You call me when you're done," he said. "The minute I'm out," she said. He picked up the cracked glasses from her hand, looked at them, pocketed them. "Go." She went. The hotel was not ostentatious in the way you might expect from the heir to one of the country's most significant criminal enterprises. It was expensive, and it was quiet, and it communicated the specific message of a family that had been wealthy long enough to no longer need to announce it, which was, in its own way, a more effective statement than anything loud would have been. She was shown up to the 14th floor by a man who said nothing, down a corridor that was deeply carpeted and absolutely silent, to a door at the end where a second man knocked twice and then stepped back. Dante opened the door himself. He looked like he hadn't slept. Not in the dramatic, hollow-eyed way of movie insomnia, but in the more mundane way of a functional person who had been running on insufficient rest for long enough that it had begun to show around the edges, a tightness around his eyes, a quality of flatness to his skin that the expensive shirt and the controlled posture couldn't quite compensate for. He looked at her. She looked at him. "What happened tonight doesn't happen again," she said before he could speak. "I don't care what you told them. I don't care if it wasn't your instruction. I don't care. It doesn't happen again." "It wasn't supposed to—" He stopped, stepped back from the door. "Come in, please." She came in because she had not made the trip to stand in a hallway. The suite was large and mostly dark. One lamp on near the window, the city outside running its nightly operations in orange and white light against the black. She remained standing. He moved to the center of the room and stopped with about 6 feet between them, which felt like a deliberate choice on his part, and which she noted. "What happened tonight was not what I told them to do," he said. "I asked them to locate Brooks and ask him to pass a message to you. That's all I asked. And what they did instead was pin him against a wall. I know." His jaw worked. "I know what they did. I'm dealing with that." "That's not my problem," she said. "What's my problem is that you sent people to touch someone I care about. What's my problem is that you have people watching my life. What's my problem, Dante, is that you keep—" She stopped herself, breathed once. "You keep doing this. You keep reaching into my life with your hands like it's still yours to reach into." Something moved across his face. "It's not reaching. It's exactly that," she said. "What else would you call it?" He was quiet. "You had someone watching me," she said. "My schedule, my apartment, my—" She stopped again. Let the silence do its work. "Do you understand what that is? Not from the outside, not as some abstract thing your family does for security purposes. Do you understand what it is to be watched by someone without your knowledge or consent? I'm not asking what you were going to do with it. I'm asking if you understand what it is." He met her eyes. And what she saw there was something she had not seen from Dante Moretti in all the years she had known him. Not anger, not calculation, not the controlled performance of a man managing how he was perceived. What she saw was a man who actually genuinely understood the thing she was telling him and was in the process of being leveled by it. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand what it is." "Good," she said. The silence that followed was different from the silences they had accumulated over the past 2 years. Those had been full of things unsaid, positions maintained, distance preserved by deliberate effort. This one was emptier, like a room after furniture has been moved out. "Sit down," he said. It was not a command. It was almost a request. She considered it. She sat. He sat across from her, forearms on his knees, the posture of a man who has decided something about what this conversation is going to be. "I need to tell you something," he said. "You already told me things. In February." "Not everything." She waited. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "After you left, after you went to MIT, I told myself you'd come back. Not because I thought it through, just—" He made a brief, frustrated gesture with one hand. I had never had to think about it. You were always there. I just assumed the permanence of it without ever. He stopped. Started again. I didn't know I was doing that. I know that sounds like an excuse. It doesn't sound like an excuse, she said. It sounds like exactly what you were doing. He absorbed that. Yeah, he said. It was. You didn't love me, she said. Not an accusation, a fact, stated simply, offered to the room so that they could both look at it directly for once. He stopped. You loved that I loved you, she said. You loved knowing I was there. You loved having a person who was guaranteed. That's not the same thing, Dante. It never was. He was quiet for so long that the sound of the city outside became audible, the low, continuous hum of a place running itself regardless of whatever was happening in this room. You're right, he said finally. I know you're right. He looked at her. But I need you to understand that somewhere in the middle of all of that, somewhere in all the time I was taking you for granted and treating you like furniture, I actually... His voice did something she had not heard from it before. Something cracked in it, briefly, before he controlled it. I actually loved you. Not the way you deserved, not the way I should have, but it was real. Whatever else it was real. The room was very quiet. Lillian sat with that. She did not know what she had expected from tonight. She had walked in with the intention of ending something, of drawing a line so clear that nothing could blur it afterward. She had not expected this. This particular quality of honesty from a man she had spent 2 years reclassifying as someone incapable of it. She didn't know what to do with it, so she told him the truth instead. I know, she said. I think I know that. Some of it was real. She looked at her hands. It still doesn't change anything, Dante. Real doesn't automatically mean right. Real doesn't mean I should have stayed. Real doesn't mean... The door of the suite opened. Both of them turned. Vivian Cross walked in. The specific quality of what happened in the next 3 seconds was this. Dante went very still. Lillian registered Vivian's presence with the immediate physical response of someone encountering a threat they hadn't known was in the room. And Vivian, who had clearly known exactly what room she was walking into, closed the door behind her with the controlled precision of a woman who has rehearsed this entrance many times. She was still stunning. She had always been stunning. The kind of striking that doesn't diminish, that high-stakes situations somehow intensify. She was dressed like she had not come from far and had not dressed for this specifically, which was itself a kind of preparation. Her eyes went from Dante to Lillian and back to Dante with the rapid cataloging attention of someone reading a situation she has thought about extensively. Vivian, Dante said. His voice had gone flat and dangerous in a single syllable. I knew you'd come back to Boston, she said to him, ignoring Lillian entirely for the moment, with the practiced smoothness of a woman managing multiple conversations simultaneously. I asked Marcus at the front desk. He always talks to me. A brief social smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Then, finally to Lillian, Hello, Lillian. Vivian, Lillian said. There's a specific kind of silence that exists between two women who were once genuinely close and are now looking at each other across the rubble of everything that used to be between them. It is not like other silences. It contains the specific weight of shared history, the sleepovers, the secrets, the years of knowing each other in the particular and intimate way that only close female friendship produces, all of it now irradiated by what came after. Lillian had not seen Vivian since the prom. 2.5 years of absence condensed into this moment in a hotel suite, and what she felt was not the anger she might have expected, but something more complicated, a layered thing, grief and recognition, and the dull ache of something genuinely lost. You need to leave, Dante said to Vivian. His voice had the low, controlled quality of someone who is not raising it precisely because the alternative is something much worse. I don't think I do, Vivian said pleasantly. I think I actually need to be in this room, because whatever conversation you two are having, I am the reason it's happening, and that earns me a chair. She looked at Lillian again. Don't you think? What do you want, Vivian? Lillian said. I want to say something to you, Vivian said. I've wanted to say it for 2 years, and I haven't been able to, and I think... Her voice wavered, fractionally, the first crack in the surface. I think I need to say it now, or I never will. Silence. Dante said, This is not... Dante! Lillian's voice cut across his cleanly. She looked at Vivian. Say it. Vivian looked at her for a moment, and then the social architecture of her expression, the pleasantness, the control, the performance of a woman entering a room like she owns it, came down in a way that Lillian had seen happen to Vivian exactly once before, in the 9th grade, when Vivian had gotten news about her father that she hadn't been prepared for. The same dismantling, the same sudden visibility of the person underneath the management. I knew, Vivian said. Her voice was quieter now. I knew how you felt about him. I knew for years. You never hid it. Or maybe you thought you did. But I knew, Lillian. I knew from the beginning, and I... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I didn't go after him to hurt you. I need you to know that. It was never about you. I wanted him for my own reasons that had nothing to do with taking something from you, and I told myself that meant it wasn't a betrayal, and a brief, humorless sound that was not quite a laugh. I was wrong. Obviously, I was wrong. I've known I was wrong for 2 years, and I've been... She looked at her hands. I'm sorry, Lillian. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry for every post I ever put up that I knew you might see, and I'm sorry for the prom, and I'm sorry for all of it. The room held the apology for a moment. Lillian sat with it the way she had learned to sit with things, not rushing to respond, not managing her face for anyone else's comfort, just actually feeling the thing and waiting to see what it settled into. It settled into something tired. I know, she said finally. I know it wasn't about me, Vivian. I think I've known that for a while. She looked at her old friend. The word felt strange and accurate at the same time. It doesn't fix it. I don't know if anything fixes it, but I hear you. Vivian's eyes were bright in a way that she was visibly working to control. She nodded once. Then she looked at Dante with an expression that contained so many things it was impossible to separate them. Affection and resentment, and the specific complicated hurt of someone who loved a person who was always looking somewhere else. She's not coming back to you, she said to him. Not cruelty. Just honesty, delivered like someone putting a thing down that had gotten heavy. She's done. Done. I've known her for 12 years and I'm telling you she's done. Whatever you're doing here isn't going to change that. Dante said nothing. Vivian looked at Lillian one more time. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not quite. But the acknowledgement of something real that had existed before everything went wrong. The ghost of a friendship that had been genuine once, and that had been destroyed by choices that could not be unchoiced. Take care of yourself, Vivian said. She left. The door closed. Dante and Lillian sat in the suite in the altered atmosphere of the room and said nothing for a long moment. Then his phone rang. He glanced at it. His expression changed. A different kind of change, the professional shift. The one that meant the world outside this hotel room was making demands. He silenced it. But it rang again almost immediately, and the second time she could see the name on the screen from across the room, and the name belonged to someone she knew by reputation as the kind of person whose calls did not get silenced twice. His father. He looked at the phone, looked at her. You need to take that, she said. Not right now. Dante. Something in her voice made him meet her eyes. Take the call. He answered it. Turned slightly away, not for privacy. She understood Italian. They both knew that now. It was no longer a usable barrier between them. But out of some reflex of compartmentalization, the habit of keeping the empire separate from everything else. His father's voice was audible from where she sat. Not the words, but the tone. And the tone was not a tone that allowed for context or preamble. Urgent, demanding immediate movement. Dante responded in short sentences. His back was straight. The shift was total and immediate. He was no longer the man who had been sitting across from her with cracked honesty on his face. He was the heir, the successor, the future boss. And the two versions of him moved between each other so quickly that watching it happen was its own kind of revelation. He hung up, turned back to her. I have to go, he said. I know. Lillian. He stopped. Whatever he had been about to say collided with the reality of the phone call, and the reality of this room, and the reality of what the next 10 minutes required him to be. And he stood there for a second in the space between those things, with an expression she would remember for a long time. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was naked in a way she had never seen from him, not once in 10 years. I'm sorry, he said. For the morning after graduation, for every year before it, for Boston. For tonight. His voice was low and entirely without armor. I know it's too late. I know you're not. He stopped, looked at her with the eyes of a man who has run out of things to hide behind. I just need you to know that you were never practice. I don't know what I was trying to be when I said that. I was performing something for Marco, and I was scared of what I actually felt, and I said the cruelest thing I could think of to someone who was in the next room, and I didn't know. I didn't know you were there, but I also... His jaw tightened. I knew what I was saying. I knew it was cruel, and I said it anyway, and I'm going to carry that. Lillian looked at him. The old pull was there, faint and distant and real. She was honest enough with herself to admit that. He was still Dante. She had loved him for a decade with the full force of who she was at every age, and love like that does not simply evaporate. It transmutes, it changes form, it becomes something quieter and sadder and more honest about its own limitations. But it was not a reason to stay. It had never been a reason to stay. She stood up. I hear you, she said. I actually hear you, all of it. She picked up her coat from the arm of the chair. But you need to go take care of whatever your father needs. And I need to call Adrian, and this... She gestured at the space between them, the room, the 2 years, all of it. This is done, Dante. Not with anger. I'm not angry at you anymore. I don't have it in me, and I don't want to spend the energy generating it. She looked at him directly. But it's done. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. The word cost him something. She could see it cost him. Okay. She walked to the door. She had her hand on it when he said her name. She stopped. Did not turn. Adrian Brooks, he said. His voice was rough. Is he good to you? She stood there with her hand on the door handle and the question sitting in the air behind her, and she thought about the cracked glasses on the sidewalk, and the roof at midnight, and 3 hours over cloth napkins, and are you scared and call me when you're done, and all the small consistent things that had accumulated into the architecture of something real. Yes, she said. A long pause. Good, he said quietly. That's good. She opened the door. The corridor was silent and deeply carpeted and empty, and she walked down it toward the elevator with her coat over her arm and her phone already in her hand, and she pressed call before she had reached the elevator doors, and Adrian answered on the first ring. I'm out, she said. You okay? He said. She pressed the elevator button, watched the number change. Yeah, she said. It's done. I'll tell you everything when I get there. I'll put the kettle on, he said. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. The doors closed on the corridor and the suite and the entire long particular history of Dante Moretti, and she looked at her own reflection in the polished metal of the elevator doors, coat over arm, phone to ear, tired in a way that was not bad tired in the way of someone who has covered a great distance and is now, finally, almost home, and she felt it. Not triumph, not relief exactly, something quieter than both of those, and more durable. She had walked into that room as the girl who had once built her entire future around the wrong person, and she was walking out as herself, only herself, the self she had been excavating for 2 years from underneath 10 years of loving someone who loved being loved. And the two versions of her were finally, irrevocably, the same person. The elevator descended. She watched the numbers drop, and then the lobby doors opened and the cold Boston night received her, and somewhere behind her on the 14th floor, a man who had everything sat alone in the growing silence of a room that now held only him, and the only sound in the city that mattered was the voice of the person she had chosen, saying, I'll put the kettle on in the simple, unhurried way of someone who is not going anywhere, and she walked out into the orange-lit street and the wind caught her hair, and she was already moving, forward, only forward, the way she had been moving for 2 years, into the night and the cold and the life that was entirely, completely, undeniably hers. The kettle was already whistling when she got there. Adrian opened the door before she knocked. He had heard her on the stairs, he said, which was probably true and was also the kind of thing she had stopped finding surprising about him, the way he paid attention to the small sounds of her approach, the particular rhythm of her footsteps that he had learned without making a project of learning it. He took her coat. She sat down on the couch and didn't immediately say anything, and he didn't ask her to, just moved to the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs and set one in front of her and sat beside her at a comfortable distance and waited. That was the thing about Adrian. He had an extraordinary capacity for waiting. She wrapped her hands around the mug. The tea was too hot to drink yet, and she held it anyway, letting the heat move through her palms, and she looked at the middle distance for a moment, and then she told him all of it. Not the edited version she might have offered someone she was still performing composure for. The full thing, from Vivian walking through the door to Dante's voice cracking on the word practice, to the elevator and the lobby and the orange-lit street. She gave him everything in the order it happened, without editorial commentary, the way you give someone something important, carefully and with both hands. He listened the way he always listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, not preparing responses in the margins of what she was saying, just actually receiving it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" he said. "I keep saying yes to that question," she said. "I know, I keep asking it. I think," she considered the word, "I think I'm tired, in a very specific way. Not sad, just tired from the weight of how long that has been, sitting there, in some form or another." She looked at him. "Does that make sense?" "Yeah," he said. "It makes a lot of sense." She drank her tea. He drank his. Outside, Boston ran its ordinary Tuesday night operations. A distant siren, the low murmur of the building's heating system, a car door somewhere below. "Vivian came," she said after a while. She hadn't quite finished telling that part, she realized. Had described it, but not processed it. "I know, you said." She apologized. Lillian held the mug. "I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," Adrian said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." She finished her tea. Adrian took the mugs to the kitchen, and she heard the water running and the small sounds of him moving in her space with the practiced ease of someone who had become familiar with it. And she sat in the quiet and felt the weight she had described begin, incrementally and genuinely, to lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, just the way things actually lighten, slowly, in pieces. The way a room gets brighter not the moment you open the curtains, but over the following minutes as your eyes adjust to more light than they're accustomed to. She fell asleep on the couch sometime before midnight, still in her clothes, and Adrian put a blanket over her and turned off the lamp, and she did not dream about anything she remembered in the morning. The conference was in 3 weeks. She finished the revisions on her paper in the days that followed, the hotel suite, and the tea and the long particular exhale of a thing finally finished. And the work was good. She knew it was good with the clear-eyed honesty she had developed about her own abilities over 2 years of being assessed by people who had no investment in being generous. Her advisor called it elegant, which from him was approximately equivalent to anyone else calling it exceptional, and she took the word home and held it quietly. She did not hear from Dante. She had not expected to, but she had been aware of a residual vigilance, the body's habit of monitoring for a threat it has become accustomed to, and the absence of contact in the days following that night had a specific quality of finality that settled something. He was gone. Not dead, not destroyed, not absent from the world, just gone from hers. The way things go when a door closes properly. Not slammed, not left ajar, but shut with the deliberate quiet of someone who means it. She thought about him sometimes, in the week that followed. Not obsessively, not painfully, more the way you think about a country you once lived in, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to places that shaped you and that you no longer inhabit. She thought about the morning after graduation with a clarity that no longer hurt the way it once had. She could examine it now like a photograph. She could see it for what it was. A 22-year-old boy performing carelessness he didn't entirely feel for an audience of one, saying cruel things because he was afraid of what he actually felt, and cruelty had always been the available tool when fear needed covering. She could see that, and it did not excuse it, and it did not unmake it, but it placed it in a human context that she could hold without it corroding everything it touched. She was not going to tell anyone that she felt something close to pity for the man he had become. The man with the empire and the power and the particular loneliness of someone who had optimized for the wrong things for so long that changing course now felt like restructuring the foundation of a building already built. She kept that to herself. It belonged to her, not to a story. Marco called on a Saturday morning in late March. She answered, which she had been doing more consistently since February, since the conversation where she had told him plainly that she heard him and that the other part was going to take time. The time had been passing. The other part was arriving slowly, the way forgiveness arrives when you don't push it. Not as a declaration, but as a gradual thawing, a morning when you realize the ice is gone and can't identify exactly when it went. "How are you?" he said. "Good," she said. "Genuinely." "I heard." "Heard what?" "That you went to see him," Marco said. "At the hotel. That you talked." She waited. "He's different since then," Marco said. "I don't know how to explain it. He's quieter. In a way that's not bad exactly. Just," he paused, searching. "Like something settled." She didn't say anything. "He's not going to contact you again," Marco said. "He told me that. He meant it. I've known him long enough to know the difference." A brief pause. "I think whatever happened in that room, it finished something. For both of you." "Yes," she said. "It did." "Good," Marco said. And then quietly, "I'm glad you're okay, Lil." The nickname landed the way childhood things land when you're an adult, with the small, specific warmth of something that predates all the complication, all the damage, all the years of accrued loss. "I'm glad too," she said. "Really?" They talked for a while about nothing consequential. She told him about the conference. He told her about a project at work. The conversation had the slightly careful quality of two people relearning the rhythms of each other, working around the things that were still tender, finding the places where the old ease still lived. It was not what they had been. It might become something different, more honest, built on the actual terms of who they both were now rather than the positions they had occupied in each other's lives when they were younger. When she hung up, she sat for a while and thought about the specific complexity of loving people who have hurt you. Not the clean narrative version where betrayal demands a permanent, decisive break, but the actual human version, which is messier and less satisfying to explain and far more true to the way people actually work. Marco was her brother. He had failed her. Both of these things were simultaneously and permanently true. What she chose to build from that was a separate question. She chose to build something. The conference was in Chicago. She flew on a Thursday morning with a printed copy of her paper in her bag and a second identical copy in her email because she was the kind of person who had learned the hard way to maintain redundancies. Adrian dropped her at the airport, which was a thing they did now. Airport drops, airport pickups, the small logistics of a shared life that had accumulated quietly without ceremony. At the curb, he held her bag while she found her ticket, then handed it back, then kissed her in the specific way of someone who is used to doing this in public and has no ambivalence about it. Easy, warm, brief, containing none of the performance that Lillian had once spent a decade watching other people direct at Dante. "Knock them out," he said. "That's the plan," she said. She did. The paper went well in the way that some things go well when you have done the work properly and the preparation has been adequate and you have arrived at a place in your own knowledge where you can speak from it without anxiety. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, because those things require a kind of self-deception she had never been able to maintain. But well, genuinely well, in the measured way of someone who knows exactly how far they have come and can now stand in a room of accomplished people and occupy their own space without shrinking into it. Afterward, at the reception, she talked to people she had only known through their published work, and they talked to her the way she had once dreamed of being talked to, as a peer, as someone whose ideas warranted serious engagement, as a person whose mind had been noted and found interesting. She called Adrian from the hotel room that night at 10:30, lying on the bed in the clothes she'd worn to the reception because she was too tired to change. "How'd it go?" he said. "Really well," she said. "I know," he said. "I saw the program. You were the youngest presenter by about 15 years. Were you cyberstalking the conference program?" she said. "I prefer remotely supportive," he said. "But yes." She laughed. It came out surprised, the way laughter sometimes does when it finds you when you're tired, real and unperformed and slightly ridiculous. "Come home soon," he said. "Tomorrow night," she said. "Good," he said. She fell asleep with the light on and the phone still in her hand and the sound of the city outside doing what cities do, and she thought, in the last few seconds before sleep arrived, "This is what I chose, this exact life. I chose it on purpose." She went home in August. The last time she had been back was a year ago, and the neighborhood received her the same way it always did, with the specific quality of a place that holds its breath when you return, that is simultaneously unchanged and different in all the ways that accumulate when you are not present to observe them. Her mother had planted something new in the front garden. Her father had painted the porch railing a slightly different shade of the same color, which she noticed, and he confirmed when she mentioned it, with the mild satisfaction of a man whose attention to such things had been recognized. She did not avoid the east side of the neighborhood. This was new. Last time she had incorporated the geographical adjustment, so automatically it hadn't required conscious decision-making. This time she walked past the Moretti house on the second morning, deliberately, on her way back from the coffee shop 2 blocks over that had been her neighborhood coffee shop since she was 16, and she walked past it with her cup in her hand and her pace unhurried, and she looked at the building the way you look at something that was once enormous and has since been revealed to be simply a building, present, specific, no longer mythologized. The house was quiet. She didn't know if anyone was home. It didn't matter. She walked past and kept walking. On her 4th day home, Vivian called. She was in the kitchen helping her mother with dinner, her phone face up on the counter, and the name appeared on the screen, and she stood there for one beat. One single beat, her hands still damp from rinsing vegetables. And then she dried her hands and picked it up. "Hey," she said. A brief pause on Vivian's end, as if she hadn't fully prepared for Lillian to answer. "Hey," she said. "You're home?" "For the week," Lillian said. "I know. I saw your car." Another pause. Would you want to get coffee?" "No pressure, She stopped. The controlled social ease that defined most of Vivian's communication was absent. What was left was something more effortful and genuine. "I meant what I said. In Boston. And I'd like to, I don't know, I don't know what I'd like exactly. I just think I'd like to be in a room with you where we're not both, where things aren't." She trailed off. "I miss you," she said, quietly and without ornament. Lillian stood in her mother's kitchen with the sounds of dinner preparation around her and the late afternoon light coming through the window and the simple, complicated fact of 12 years of friendship sitting on the other end of the phone. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "The place on Clement Street." "Okay," Vivian said. "Yeah, okay." The place on Clement Street had been their place since they were 15. Lillian arrived first and got a table in the back, which is where they had always sat because Vivian had a theory about backs of rooms being more comfortable for long conversations, which Lillian had never verified but had adopted because Vivian had stated it with such confidence that it had seemed like established fact. Vivian came in 4 minutes later, which was early by her historical standards, and which Lillian noted. She looked different. Not diminished, not damaged, not any of the things that a satisfying narrative might require of someone who had done what she had done. She looked like a person who had done some work, internally, the kind that shows up as a slight quieting around the eyes, a less performative quality to the way she moved through a room. She sat down and ordered black coffee, which was what she had always ordered, and she wrapped her hands around the cup, and she looked at Lillian across the table with the direct gaze of someone who has decided to stop managing their own presentation. "I don't know where to start," Vivian said. "Then don't start anywhere specific," Lillian said. "Just talk." So Vivian talked. Not the rehearsed version. She had clearly arrived with something prepared and had abandoned it at the door, which was probably the right decision. She talked about the years she had spent telling herself that the friendship rules had exceptions, that Lillian had never officially claimed Dante, that wanting something was not the same as taking it. She talked about the way Dante had pursued her. Because it had been pursuit, she said, and Lillian had known that too, had known it and chosen not to look directly at it. And the way that being pursued by him had felt like winning something she hadn't known she wanted until the winning was suddenly available. She talked about the relationship itself, not sparing him, not sparing herself. The months of excitement that gave way to the specific loneliness of being with someone who was always slightly somewhere else, who held you at the precise distance required to prevent you from getting close enough to make demands. The affairs, not confirmed, but strongly implied by the specific quality of his absences and the careful way he redirected certain questions. The public happiness that existed in inverse proportion to the private truth of it. "I was competing with a ghost," Vivian said. "For 2 years I was competing with the idea of you in his head. He never said your name, but you were there. Every time he went quiet when I said something he didn't like. Every time he pulled back when things got too real. It was you. The version of you that had just accepted things. That's what he was missing. Not actually you, the you that was guaranteed. Lillian looked at her. That's a very honest thing to say. I've had 2 years to be honest, Vivian said. I didn't enjoy any of them, for the record. Something that might have been almost laughter moved through Lillian briefly. No, she said. I don't imagine you did. They sat with that. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, Lillian said finally. What you did. I'm not going to do the thing where I reframe it so it costs less than it actually cost. She looked at her old friend steadily. You knew. You knew how I felt for years, and you made a choice, and that choice was a betrayal. It just was. Vivian nodded, no deflection. And I also know, Lillian continued, that you've been carrying that for a long time, and I can see that you mean what you said, and she paused, found the word carefully. And I'm willing to find out if there's something on the other side of all of this. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if we can go back to what we were, because I don't think you can go back to things. I think you can only build something new that knows more than the old thing did. She looked at Vivian, but I'm willing to find out. Vivian looked at her for a long moment with the undefended expression of someone receiving something they weren't sure they deserved. Then she nodded again, once, and looked down at her coffee. That's more than I expected, she said quietly. I know, Lillian said. Don't waste it. The corner of Vivian's mouth moved, not a full smile, something smaller and more real than a smile. I won't, she said. They talked for another hour. Not about Dante. They had covered that ground and neither of them had any interest in excavating it further. They talked about Vivian's plans, which had shifted significantly in the past year. She was moving, starting something new in a different city, the first genuinely independent decision she had made in years that wasn't oriented around someone else's life. She talked about it with a tentative quality, the energy of someone who has not yet fully trusted themselves to want something on their own terms, who is in the early uncertain stages of doing so anyway. Lillian listened and asked questions and did not offer more reassurance than she had available because she had learned that meaningless reassurance was its own kind of condescension, and Vivian had earned something more honest than that. When they left, they stood outside on the sidewalk in the August heat, and the question of how to say goodbye sat between them briefly. Vivian held out her hand, then seemed to reconsider, then made a small, slightly awkward gesture that was almost a hug and landed somewhere between the two. Lillian completed it, properly. Brief, real. Take care of yourself, Vivian, she said. You too, Vivian said, and then quietly, he was right about one thing, you know. You were always the most genuinely good person in any room you were in. I think I resented it for years, and I don't anymore. She walked away. Lillian stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and felt the last weight of that chapter settle finally and permanently into the past tense, where it had belonged for a long time and where it would now stay. Her last evening home, she sat with her parents on the back porch after dinner. This was a thing they had done since she was small. The three of them, or four when Marco was around, out on the porch in the evening with whatever was left of dinner and the particular quality of early August dark that arrives late and smells like heat leaving the ground. Her mother was knitting something she refused to identify. Her father was reading in the way of a man whose eyes move across the page without urgency. Lillian had her feet up on the railing and her phone in her lap with a text from Adrian about the logistics of picking her up from the airport tomorrow, which she had answered and was now simply holding. You seem different, her mother said, without looking up from the knitting. Different how? Settled, her mother said, like something stopped moving around in there. She nodded slightly in the general direction of Lillian's chest. It's good. To see. Lillian looked at the darkening yard. Yeah, she said. Something did. Her father turned a page, did not look up. The Brooks boy, he said, in the tone of a man making an observation rather than asking a question. Partially, Lillian said. Mostly me, I think. He just made it easier to see clearly. Her father nodded, turned another page. Her mother made a small sound that was not words but communicated thorough satisfaction. They sat in the evening and the dark came in from the edges of the yard and the first crickets started and nobody said anything for a while. And the silence was the kind that belongs to people who have been loving each other for long enough that it doesn't need filling. Lillian thought, sitting there, about what she would have said to the 22-year-old version of herself on the morning after graduation. The girl on the kitchen floor with the shaking hands and the cracked understanding of a decade's worth of certainty. She didn't believe in that kind of message sending, didn't place stock in the retrospective comfort of imagining herself wiser sooner. But she thought about it anyway, the way you think about things you can't change, which is sometimes just the mind's way of confirming the distance you've traveled. She would have said, "It doesn't end here. It starts here." Nothing more eloquent than that, just the plain truth, plainly delivered. And then she would have made herself coffee and gotten on with it, which was, more or less, what she had done. She graduated the following spring. The ceremony was outdoors, which meant the weather was a point of contention for weeks prior. Her mother worried about cold. Adrian said, "Whatever the temperature, it would be fine." Priya had opinions about the optimal layers for someone who ran hot. James from the study group made an extensive joke about climate control that landed better than it should have and became a running reference for the remainder of the academic year. She walked across the stage on a day that was cold and bright, exactly between seasons, the kind of day that can't decide what it is and ends up being more alive for the indecision. The air sharp, the sky absurdly blue, the light, the particular quality of spring light that makes everything look slightly more serious than it is. Her parents were there. Marco came, she had asked him, and he had come without making it larger than it was, which was exactly the right register. Adrian was there, somewhere in the crowd, and she knew where without looking because she had learned how to locate him in rooms the same way she had learned her own footsteps on his stairs. When her name was called, she walked. She shook the hand of the person handing out the degrees. She held the folder in both hands and paused for exactly 1 second at the edge of the stage, because the day was very bright and she wanted to see it. The crowd, her people scattered through it, the ridiculous abundance of a moment she had built from scratch. She saw her mother stand up and immediately sit back down as if reconsidering the impulse and then stand again. She saw her father, who did not stand, who simply looked at her from his seat with the expression of a man whose pride was too large to fit into a single gesture and had therefore decided to wear it quietly. She saw Adrian, who had found a spot near the aisle and was not waving, not performing enthusiasm, just watching her with the specific steadiness that she had come to understand was how he loved, not with demonstrations, but with the quality of his attention, which had never once wavered. She walked off the stage. There was a photograph taken that afternoon, by Marco of all people, who had borrowed someone's actual camera rather than using a phone because he had decided this warranted it without being asked and without announcing the decision. The photograph showed Lillian in her graduation robe, not posed. She was mid-turn, laughing at something Adrian had said, her degree tucked under one arm, one hand raised toward her face to shield her eyes from the bright, cold sun. She was not looking at the camera. She did not know the photograph was being taken. She looked, in the photograph, exactly like what she was, a person in the middle of her life, in the middle of a good moment, not curating it, not managing it, not arranging herself for anyone's viewing, just there, fully, simply, entirely there. Marco gave her a print of it the following week, in a frame, without ceremony, left it on her kitchen counter with a note that said, "Only for your wall," in his handwriting, which had not changed since they were kids. She put it on the wall above her desk, not as a monument, not as a reminder of anything she had survived or overcome, just because it was a good photograph of a good day, and the woman in it was someone she was glad to know. Years passed the way. Years do when you are actually living them. Faster than you expect, slower than you fear, the texture of them finer-grained and more various than any summary can account for. Lillian built the career she had seen from a distance on the night she undeferred her MIT enrollment, the one that had looked enormous and uncertain and possible. It became, piece by piece, real. A research position that became a permanent role. Work that solved actual problems in the way she had always wanted her intelligence to be used. Not for performance, not for proximity to someone else's importance, but for the satisfaction of problems that resisted solution until they didn't. Until she found the angle, the gap in the logic, the thing everyone else had looked past. She and Adrian built something that accumulated its own history without making an event of the accumulation. An apartment that became a home without a specific moment of designation. a life that fit both of them without requiring either of them to revise the fundamental thing. She heard about Dante the way you hear about people from the world you left, through the ambient information that passes between people still connected to that world. He rose, as expected and as prepared for, to the position his father had been grooming him for his entire life. The youngest boss in the Moretti family's history, by some accounts. He was good at it, by all reports. His father's discipline and his own intelligence and the particular quality of controlled authority that had always been his most genuinely natural trait. She heard that he had eventually married a woman connected to another family, the kind of match that made strategic sense, that Marco described in one of their monthly calls as fine, I think, genuinely fine, not what he once thought he wanted, but maybe what he actually needed. She listened to that and thought about it and wished him well with the uncomplicated sincerity of someone who has set something down so long ago that picking it back up is no longer even a theoretical option. She did not contact him to say so. He knew. The coffee shop in February had made everything clear enough that no subsequent communication was required. One evening in early spring, several years after graduation, she was in the kitchen making dinner when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize immediately, and then recognized with a slight pause before she opened it. It was from Marco, on a new number. 3 lines. Just wanted to say, he's okay. In case you ever wondered, he's okay. She read it twice, set the phone down, picked up the wooden spoon and went back to what she was making. Adrian came in from the other room a few minutes later and sat at the kitchen counter and asked how she was doing, and she said fine, genuinely fine, good, actually, and she meant it completely, and he took her at her word because that was the deal, and had always been the deal, and the deal had proved itself sound over the years. She did not tell him about the text. Not because she was hiding it, she had no architecture of secrecy left in her, had dismantled it piece by piece, along with everything else she no longer needed. But because it required no discussion, it was just information. Someone was okay. She was glad. The pasta finished and they ate and talked about plans for the following weekend and something Priya had said that was funny, and Adrian's opinion about a problem he was working on that she disagreed with and proceeded to tell him so, directly and with specifics, which he received with the good-humored seriousness she had always valued, the way he took her seriously without taking disagreement personally, which had seemed when she first encountered it like a small thing and had proven to be one of the largest things. After dinner, they did the dishes and she washed and he dried and they talked about nothing in particular, and the evening came in through the kitchen window, blue and quiet, and she thought about the girl she had been at 22, standing at a kitchen sink with shaking hands and a cracked understanding of love. She thought about her, with kindness, with the specific earned tenderness of someone who knows what it costs to become a different person, not a better person in the simple ascending narrative way, but a truer one, more accurately assembled, with a better sense of which materials to build from and which to leave on the ground. That girl had been brave in ways she hadn't given herself credit for. She had chosen MIT. She had walked away without explanation from the things she had built her entire world around, and she had done it quietly, which is sometimes harder than doing it loudly. She had stood on Arctic ice and watched the northern lights, and let the space inside her start to fill with herself again. She had done the work. And here, on the other side of it, not triumphant, not transcendent, just genuinely and specifically and sustainably here, was what the work had built. She put the last dish away. Adrian said something behind her. She turned. "What?" she said. I said, "Do you want tea?" "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I do." He put the kettle on. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter and looked at him. Just looked at him, the ordinary particular fact of him in her kitchen on an ordinary evening, the man who had handed her tea on the worst night of a chapter she was glad was over and had been handing it to her, in one form or another, ever since. She thought, this is it, not arrival. There was no arrival. That was the lie the younger version of her had believed, that there was a destination at which everything became uncomplicated. But this, the dailiness of a life built on honest terms, the specific quiet of evenings that don't require performance, the deep, unshowy fact of being known by someone who wanted to know you without needing you to be simpler or more convenient or positioned so that their certainty about you could remain comfortable. This was what she had chosen. This was what choosing yourself, finally and fully, looked like. Not a crown, not a kingdom, Not the queen of anything, just her life, large enough to hold everything she actually was, open in every direction she wanted to go, shared with someone who understood that the sharing was a gift and not a guarantee. The kettle began to whistle. She reached for